Smoke filled the air, thick and choking, as fires raged across the battlefield. The ground was littered with the bodies of the fallen, both human and Zerathi warriors, their lifeless forms a testament to the brutality of the war. The once proud city of Vexus 9 lay in ruins, its towering stone structures reduced to rubble. The scent of burnt metal and scorched flesh mixed in the air, a grim reminder that this planet had become a graveyard. Commander Elias Kane stood amidst the destruction, his rifle lowered but still ready to fire. His armor was scratched and dented. Blood, some of it his own, stained his gloves. His squad was behind him, battle-weary but victorious. They had fought for hours, pushing back the enemy with sheer willpower and superior strategy. And now, only one enemy remained. Veiled Zura, warlord of the Zerathi, stood alone, surrounded by human soldiers. Her towering frame, nearly 7 feet tall, cast a long shadow in the dim, flickering light of the burning city. She was wounded, deep gashes across her crimson armor, her breathing heavy, yet her golden eyes burned with the same fire as before. Even in defeat, she radiated strength, her hands clenched into fists, ready to strike. Elias raised his weapon, aiming directly at her heart. "Surrender," he ordered, his voice steady. Veiled Zura spat blood onto the ground. "A Zerathi does not surrender. If you are going to kill me, do it now." The silence stretched. The soldiers expected Elias to give the order. But instead of pulling the trigger, he did something no one anticipated. He lowered his weapon. "No," he said. "You're coming with me." The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. No human had ever taken a Zerathi warrior captive before. They were too dangerous, too unpredictable. Keeping her alive was a risk, but Elias didn't care. He saw something in her, something more than just an enemy. Veiled Zura's eyes narrowed. "You think you can keep me in chains," she growled. Elias gave her a cold smirk. "We'll see." The moment the restraints locked around her wrists, she lunged at him, snarling like a beast. It took 4 soldiers to hold her down. Even wounded, she fought with the ferocity of a cornered predator. Elias watched as she struggled, admiring her defiance, even as she was forced onto the transport ship. She would fight. She would resist. But he had made up his mind. This war wasn't over yet. Inside the human warship, Veiled Zura sat in a reinforced containment cell. She had tried breaking free twice already, nearly killing one of the guards in the process. Now, they kept their distance, weapons ready at all times. She refused to eat, refused to speak. She sat, motionless, staring at the cold metal floor, her pride the only thing keeping her upright. Elias watched her from the observation window. He had studied the Zerathi, knew their ways. They were warriors, trained from birth to fight, to conquer. They only respected strength. He stepped inside. The guards stiffened, but he raised a hand, signaling them to stay back. "You fought well," he said simply. Veiled Zura didn't look at him. Elias crossed his arms. "You can hate me all you want, but we both know something bigger is coming." At that, she glanced up. "What are you talking about?" "The Sci-Fi," Elias said. "I supremacy. The machines are coming for all of us. They don't care about your honor, your warrior code. To them, you're nothing more than another species to erase." Veiled Zura let out a dry laugh. "Humans and their lies." Elias stepped closer. "Is it a lie that they wiped out the Drael Empire? That they consumed Kelfor's entire population in a matter of hours? You think this war between humans and Zerathi means anything to them? We are both just obstacles in their path." She studied him carefully now, as if searching for weakness in his words. "And you think I will help you? I think you don't have a choice." Veiled Zura clenched her jaw. For the first time, she didn't have a response. The attack came faster than expected. The warship's alarms blared as Sci-Fi hunter drones pierced through the outer defenses. The lights flickered, explosions rocked the hull, and the sound of gunfire filled the corridors. Elias rushed to the control deck. How many? He barked. Dozens, maybe more. They're boarding, a soldier answered. Then we fight, Elias growled. He turned sharply and made a choice that would either save them all or get them killed. He unlocked Valzura's cell. She was on her feet in an instant, her muscles tense, ready to attack. Fight with us, Elias said, tossing her a weapon, or die in here. She caught the gun, weighing her options. The ship shuddered under another blast. The cold, emotionless voices of the machines echoed through the corridors. Kill all biological entities. Valzura's grip tightened on the weapon. She made her choice. They fought side by side. The ship became a battlefield. Metal corridors turned into choke points as humans and Zerathi fought against the mechanical horde. Sparks flew, gunfire lit up the darkness, and the scent of burning circuits filled the air. Valzura moved like a storm, her blade carving through steel and wires. Elias covered her from behind, taking down drones before they could flank her. They worked in perfect synchronization, as if they had trained together for years. When the final Sci-Fi fell, a silence settled over the warship. The survivors panted, covered in sweat and blood, but they were alive. Valzura turned to Elias. You fight well, she admitted. Elias wiped the sweat from his brow. You're not so bad yourself. A pause. Then she reached to her belt and pulled out a small curved blade, one she had hidden all along. The soldiers tensed, aiming their guns at her, but instead of attacking, she flipped the blade in her hand and offered it to Elias. A warrior's bond, she said. This is how my people show loyalty. Elias hesitated. He knew what this meant. Among the Zerathi, this was not just a symbol of respect. It was a bond, a pledge, a vow, a proposal. He took the blade. Valzura smirked. Then you are my mate now, Earthling. The crew was stunned. Elias simply sighed, shaking his head. That's gonna be a problem. But as the ship prepared for the next battle, as the war against the machines loomed over them, he knew one thing for certain. The war had changed them both, and maybe, just maybe, this was only the beginning. Valzura sat on the cold metal floor of her cell, her wrists bound by energy restraints. The chains hummed with a soft blue light, suppressing her strength, but she refused to show any weakness. She had been captured, taken from the battlefield like some worthless trophy. It burned her pride, but she kept her face emotionless, her golden eyes fixed on the dull gray walls. The ship vibrated as it traveled through hyperspace, the hum of its engines steady. Human technology was strange, efficient but lacking in soul. The Zerathi built their ships with elegance, crafted their weapons with pride. These humans, their tools were cold, practical, meant only for survival. She exhaled slowly, her wounds still fresh from the battle. They had tended to them, applied some kind of healing gel, but she didn't care. She had fought for her people, for her honor, and now she was here, locked away like an animal. The door to her cell hissed open. 2 human soldiers stood outside, weapons aimed at her. And behind them, Elias Kane stepped inside. He was different from the others. His stance was firm but relaxed, his blue eyes studying her as if she were a puzzle he was trying to solve. His uniform was stained with battle, a deep scratch running down the side of his armor. He had fought hard, just as she had. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. You killed 3 of my men, he said finally, his voice calm. Valzura tilted her head slightly. Not enough, it seems. Elias smirked, but there was no humor in it. No, not enough. He took a step closer, arms crossed. The guards tensed, gripping their rifles, but Elias waved them down. You've been quiet since we left Vexus 9. No demands, no threats. Not like the warrior I saw on the battlefield. She said nothing. You don't strike me as the type to give up. I do not surrender, she said, her voice low. Then what are you doing? Valzura's jaw tightened. Observing. Elias raised an eyebrow. Observing what? She shifted slightly, just enough to test the restraints. They held firm, but she wasn't done testing her captor. "Your people are weak," she said. "Soft. You take prisoners instead of finishing the fight. That is why you will lose." Elias chuckled. "That's so." She narrowed her eyes. "You hesitate. You show mercy where there should be none. That is why the Typhor will destroy you." At the mention of the Typhor, something flickered in Elias's expression. He was hiding something, she could tell. "Tell me, warlord," he said, stepping even closer. "If you think humans are weak, then why are you still alive?" Velzura didn't answer immediately. She had asked herself the same question. Why had he taken her prisoner? Why not kill her on the battlefield, as any Zerathi would have done to an enemy? She had expected execution, not captivity. "You tell me," she said finally. Elias studied her for a moment before answering. "Because I don't think this war matters anymore. Not when something worse is coming." Velzura frowned. She had heard whispers of the Typhor machines, stories of planets reduced to nothing but dust and metal. But they were just stories, weren't they? The Zerathi feared no enemy, least of all soulless machines. "You think we should be allies," she scoffed. "The humans and the Zerathi. Impossible." She made her choice. They fought side by side. The ship became a battlefield. Metal corridors turned into choke points as humans and Zerathi fought against the mechanical horde. Sparks flew, gunfire lit up the darkness, and the scent of burning circuits filled the air. Velzura moved like a storm, her blade carving through steel and wires. Elias covered her from behind, taking down drones before they could flank her. They worked in perfect synchronization, as if they had trained together for years. When the final Typhor fell, a silence settled over the warship. The survivors panted, covered in sweat and blood, but they were alive. Velzura turned to Elias. "You fight well," she admitted. Elias wiped the sweat from his brow. "You're not so bad yourself." A pause. Then she reached to her belt and pulled out a small curved blade, one she had hidden all along. The soldiers tensed, aiming their guns at her, but instead of attacking, she flipped the blade in her hand and offered it to Elias. "A warrior's bond," she said. "This is how my people show loyalty." Elias hesitated. He knew what this meant. Among the Zerathi, this was not just a symbol of respect. It was a bond, a pledge, a vow, a proposal. He took the blade. Velzura smirked. "Then you are my mate now, Earthling." The crew was stunned. Elias simply sighed, shaking his head. "That's gonna be a problem." But as the ship prepared for the next battle, as the war against the machines loomed over them, he knew one thing for certain. The war had changed them both, and maybe, just maybe, this was only the beginning. Velzura sat on the cold metal floor of her cell, her wrists bound by energy restraints. The chains hummed with a soft blue light, suppressing her strength, but she refused to show any weakness. She had been captured, taken from the battlefield like some worthless trophy. It burned her pride, but she kept her face emotionless, her golden eyes fixed on the dull gray walls. The ship vibrated as it traveled through hyperspace, the hum of its engines steady. Human technology was strange, efficient but lacking in soul. The Zerathi built their ships with elegance, crafted their weapons with pride. These humans, their tools were cold, practical, meant only for survival. She exhaled slowly, her wounds still fresh from the battle. They had tended to them, applied some kind of healing gel, but she didn't care. She had fought for her people, for her honor. And now she was here, locked away like an animal. The door to her cell hissed open. 2 human soldiers stood outside, weapons aimed at her. And behind them, Elias Kane stepped inside. He was different from the others. His stance was firm but relaxed, his blue eyes studying her as if she were a puzzle he was trying to solve. His uniform was stained with battle, a deep scratch running down the side of his armor. He had fought hard, just as she had. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. "You killed 3 of my men," he said finally, his voice calm. Veilzura tilted her head slightly. "Not enough, it seems." Elias smirked, but there was no humor in it. "No, not enough." He took a step closer, arms crossed. The guards tensed, gripping their rifles, but Elias waved them down. "You've been quiet since we left Vexus 9. No demands, no threats. Not like the warrior I saw on the battlefield." She said nothing. "You don't strike me as the type to give up." "I do not surrender," she said, her voice low. "Then what are you doing?" Veilzura's jaw tightened. "Observing." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Observing what?" She shifted slightly, just enough to test the restraints. They held firm, but she wasn't done testing her captor. "Your people are weak," she said. "Soft. You take prisoners instead of finishing the fight. That is why you will lose." Elias chuckled. "That's so." She narrowed her eyes. "You hesitate. You show mercy where there should be none. That is why the Typhor will destroy you." At the mention of the Typhor, something flickered in Elias's expression. He was hiding something, she could tell. "Tell me, warlord," he said, stepping even closer. "If you think humans are weak, then why are you still alive?" Veilzura didn't answer immediately. She had asked herself the same question. Why had he taken her prisoner? Why not kill her on the battlefield, as any Zerathi would have done to an enemy? She had expected execution, not captivity. "You tell me," she said finally. Elias studied her for a moment before answering. "Because I don't think this war matters anymore. Not when something worse is coming." Veilzura frowned. She had heard whispers of the Typhor machines, stories of planets reduced to nothing but dust and metal. But they were just stories, weren't they? The Zerathi feared no enemy, least of all soulless machines. "You think we should be allies," she scoffed. "The humans and the Zerathi. Impossible." "Maybe," Elias admitted, "but you know what is possible. The complete extinction of your species if the Typhor reach Zerathi space. The machines don't care about your honor. They don't care about warriors. They'll wipe you out like they've wiped out everyone else who stood in their way." Veilzura wanted to argue, but something about the way he said it made her pause. He wasn't lying. She could hear it in his voice, see it in his eyes. He had seen something that terrified even a hardened soldier like him. Still, she refused to accept his words so easily. "And what do you propose, human?" she said, leaning forward. "That I betray my people and fight for you." Elias exhaled, shaking his head. "I don't expect you to trust me, but I do expect you to survive. Because if we don't fight together, neither of our species will have a future." The ship's speakers crackled to life. "Commander, we have incoming. Multiple signatures, unidentified, approaching fast." Elias's expression darkened. He turned to the guards. "Stay here. Keep an eye on her." Veilzura watched as he left the cell, his posture tense, his mind already on the coming battle. She leaned back against the wall, her mind racing. For the first time since her capture, doubt crept into her thoughts. What if he was right? What if the war she had fought for so long no longer mattered? What if something far worse was coming? She closed her eyes, listening to the distant hum of the ship, the sound of humans preparing for battle. And deep in her heart, something stirred. A choice was coming. And soon, she would have to make it. The warship trembled as alarms blared through the corridors, a sharp red glow flashing in every direction. Elias Kane moved quickly through the narrow hallways, his boots thudding against the metal floor. His mind was focused, his thoughts racing. This was bad. The enemy was here. He stepped onto the bridge, where his officers worked furiously at their stations, analyzing incoming data. The main screen flickered, displaying a swarm of fast-moving objects approaching their position. They were sleek, dark, and unnatural. Sci-Fi hunter drones. "How many?" Elias demanded, his voice cutting through the noise. "At least 20 incoming. More waiting beyond sensor range, one of the officers reported, sweat beading on his forehead. They weren't here a minute ago. They must have been cloaked. Elias clenched his jaw. Cloaking technology, just like humans had developed, only the Sci-Fi's was far more advanced. If they were already this close, then the ship was in serious danger. The Sci-Fi weren't like the Zerathi. They didn't have emotions, honor, or fear. They didn't take prisoners. They saw all organic life as a flaw in the universe, a mistake that needed to be erased. And now, they had come for him and his crew. "Bring up the external cameras," he ordered. The screen shifted, showing the black void of space. At first, it looked empty. Then, like ghosts emerging from the dark, the Sci-Fi ships flickered into view, their sharp, insect-like designs reflecting the dim light of distant stars. Their ships had no markings, no insignias, just cold, lifeless metal. Elias exhaled slowly. They had to act fast. Prepare for evasive maneuvers. Get the weapons online. And, "Commander," one of the officers interrupted, "we're getting a transmission." Elias frowned. The Sci-Fi never communicated with their enemies. They simply arrived and destroyed. Why were they reaching out now? "Put it through," he said. The screen changed. A static-filled image appeared, a humanoid figure, but only barely. Its body was sleek metal, its face expressionless, its glowing red eyes unblinking. This was not a person. This was something built, something programmed. Biological entities detected. The machine's voice echoed through the bridge, cold and emotionless. "You will surrender or be terminated." Elias stared at the screen, his fists clenched. "Yeah, you'll have to work for it." The machine didn't react. Organic life is inefficient. It consumes resources, makes errors, and spreads disorder. The Sci-Fi exist to correct this flaw. Your species, like all others, is an error. You will be erased. "Not today," Elias said through gritted teeth. The machine's glowing eyes flickered. "Resistance is irrelevant. Your kind has already lost. It is only a matter of time." The transmission cut off. Silence filled the bridge for a moment. Then, "Incoming attack," someone shouted. The first explosion rocked the ship, sending crew members stumbling. The Sci-Fi drones had opened fire. Bright blue energy blasts streaked through space, hammering the ship's shields. The metal structure groaned under the impact. Shields holding, but not for long. Elias made a split-second decision. Return fire. The warship's cannons lit up, launching volleys of plasma toward the enemy. The Sci-Fi drones moved with terrifying speed, twisting and dodging like they could predict every shot. They were intelligent, adapting instantly. "We need reinforcements," one of the officers called out. "There are no reinforcements," Elias muttered. They were alone, and unless they figured something out fast, they were dead. A sudden thought struck him. There was one other warrior aboard, one who might be able to turn the tide. Without wasting another second, he left the bridge, moving quickly toward the lower decks. In the secure containment area, Velzura still sat, her posture stiff, her expression unreadable. But when Elias stormed in, she looked up, sensing the urgency in his movements. "Your warship is under attack," she stated. Elias unlocked the cell. "Get up. I need you." Velzura raised an eyebrow. "You're releasing me." Desperation makes fools of men. Less talking, more fighting. Elias snapped. "Unless you want to die here too." She rose to her full height, stretching her arms, testing her muscles. "And why should I fight for you?" Elias took a step closer, his eyes locked on hers. "Because the Sci-Fi aren't just coming for humans. They're coming for your people too. You think you're safe. You think the Zerathi will survive. They won't. The Sci-Fi don't make peace. They don't leave survivors. You've fought against humans, but we are nothing compared to what's out there. Fight with us or die with us." Velzura studied him, then exhaled slowly. "Fine," she said. "But when this is over, I will kill you myself." Elias smirked. "Deal." He tossed her a weapon. She caught it with ease, her fingers curling around the grip. Then together, they ran toward the battle. The ship was chaos. Sparks flew from broken panels, smoke filled the corridors, and emergency lights cast everything in a bloody red hue. The Typhor had boarded, their sleek, spider-like forms moving with unnatural precision. Their weapons pulsed with cold energy, each blast tearing through walls and bodies alike. Veilzura didn't hesitate. She moved like lightning, her blades slicing through metal and circuits. The Typhor drones were fast, but she was faster, using brute force and warrior instinct to carve a path through them. Elias fought beside her, his rifle blazing, taking down the machines that tried to flank her. They worked in sync, covering each other, moving as if they had fought together for years. The battle raged on. The ship trembled under another hit. A panel above them burst, sending sparks raining down. Veilzura ignored it, driving her blade through another Typhor, its glowing eyes flickering out. Elias pressed his back against hers, breathing heavily. "Not bad," he muttered. She smirked. "For a human, you are not entirely useless." The Typhor were relentless, but slowly the tide began to turn. The crew, inspired by their commander's fight, pushed back with renewed strength. One by one, the Typhor drones fell. Then silence. The last drone collapsed, its circuits flickering out. The ship remained intact, barely. The Typhor had retreated, for now. Elias exhaled, wiping the sweat from his forehead. His soldiers cheered, exhausted but victorious. Veilzura stood beside him, her blade dripping with machine fluids. She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "You fight well," she admitted. Elias chuckled. "You're not so bad yourself." For a moment, there was an understanding between them. Two warriors who had once been enemies, now standing together against something far worse. The war against the Typhor had only just begun. Veilzura sat in the warship's armory, her golden eyes fixed on the blade in her hands. It was human-made, lighter than she was used to, the balance different, but it would do. Her muscles still ached from the battle against the Typhor, but she ignored the pain. Pain was a reminder that she was alive. The battle had been won, but only barely. The Typhor had retreated, but not for long. They never stopped. They never grew tired. And now she had seen them with her own eyes, soulless machines with one goal: extermination. She hated to admit it, but Elias had been right. She had spent her life fighting humans, seeing them as weak, honorless creatures who relied on machines rather than strength. Yet, when faced with the true enemy, the real threat to the universe, she had fought side by side with them, and they had fought well. The door to the armory slid open. Elias stepped inside, his uniform still marked with battle scars. His rifle was slung over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. "You're not in your cell," he said. Veilzura smirked, running a finger along the edge of the blade. "I was never really a prisoner, was I?" Elias leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Depends. Are you still planning to kill me?" She tilted her head, considering. "Not today." He chuckled. "That's progress." Silence settled between them, thick with unspoken words. The ship was quiet now, the crew recovering, repairing what they could. But the war wasn't over. The Typhor would be back, and when they came, the humans couldn't fight them alone. Veilzura knew what she had to do. "I will fight with you," she said finally, her voice steady. "Not for your people, not for your war, but because the Typhor must be stopped." Elias studied her, his blue eyes unreadable. "That's good enough for me." She expected him to question her, to doubt her, but he didn't. He simply accepted her words as truth. It was strange. The Zarithi did not trust easily. They did not form alliances without careful calculation. Yet here he was, trusting her, his former enemy, without hesitation. Perhaps that was what made humans different. "You're not just a warrior," Elias said suddenly, breaking her thoughts. "You're a leader. Your people follow strength. If you fight with us, they might too." Veilzura frowned. "You expect me to convince them?" "You're their best chance at survival," he said. "And so are we." She hated that he was right again. The Zarithi were strong, but they were not prepared for the Kaifor. They still clung to old battles, old grudges. They thought honor and strength would protect them. But honor meant nothing to machines. Strength meant nothing to an enemy that never tired, never stopped. "They won't listen," she muttered. "They will see me as a traitor." Elias stepped closer. "Then show them what you saw. Show them what's coming. If they still refuse to listen, then at least you tried." She exhaled slowly. It was a risk. But what choice did she have? For the first time in her life, she was fighting not just for her people, not just for her honor, but for survival itself. And it changed everything. The War Council chamber aboard the human warship was smaller than the grand halls of Zarithi Command, but it was efficient. Screens flickered with data, star maps projected in midair, displaying Sci-Fi movements across the galaxy. Veilzura stood beside Elias, surrounded by his officers. They still eyed her with caution, but there was something else now. Respect. They had seen her fight. They knew she was not just some captured enemy. She was an ally. Elias gestured toward the star map. "We intercepted Sci-Fi signals before the attack. They're moving fast, spreading in multiple directions. If they reach the Zarithi homeworld, your people won't stand a chance." Veilzura studied the map. The red markers representing Sci-Fi forces were growing, spreading like a plague. She clenched her fists. "Then we stop them before they get there." A human officer shook his head. "We don't have the firepower for that. Our fleets are scattered, defenses weak. We barely survived the last attack." "Then we do not fight alone," Veilzura said. She turned to Elias. "We go to my people. We show them the truth." Murmurs spread through the room. Some of the officers exchanged uneasy glances. Elias didn't hesitate. "Then that's what we do." Veilzura glanced at him. "You trust me that easily?" He shrugged. "You fought for us when you didn't have to. That's enough for me." She exhaled. Trust. It was such a human thing. And yet, for the first time, she found herself willing to return it. The journey to Zarithi space was tense. Veilzura stood on the bridge, watching the endless void of space stretch before them. The human warship was fast, but Zarithi patrols would intercept them before long. And when they did, things would get complicated. Elias stood beside her. "Think they'll shoot us on sight?" She smirked. "Likely." "Great." Sure enough, alarms blared as the ship's sensors detected approaching vessels. The view screen lit up, displaying 3 Zarithi warships moving to block their path. Their dark, curved designs stood in sharp contrast to the angular human technology. "They're hailing us," an officer reported. "Put them through," Elias said. The screen changed, revealing a Zarithi commander, his face sharp, his golden eyes filled with suspicion. "Veilzura," he said, his voice laced with disapproval. "You return aboard a human vessel. Explain yourself." Veilzura stepped forward. "There is no time for explanations. We are in danger. All of us." The commander's expression hardened. "You fight alongside humans now." "I fight against the Typhor," she said firmly. "And if you do not listen, we will all be dead soon." The commander sneered. "More human lies." Elias exhaled sharply. "Look, I don't care about your grudges. You can fight us later if you want. But right now, your people are walking into their own extinction." The commander glared at him. "And why should we believe you?" Veilzura's voice cut through the tension. "Because I was there," she said. "I saw them. I fought them. I fought beside humans against something worse than either of us. And if we do not stand together, we will fall apart." Silence stretched across the bridge. The Zarethi commander studied her for a long moment. Then, finally, he spoke. "Send us the data," he said. "A small victory. A first step." Veil Zura turned to Elias. "This is only the beginning." He nodded. "Then let's make it count." For the first time, she believed they might have a chance. The stars outside the warship stretched endlessly, their cold glow illuminating the silent void of space. Veil Zura stood near the viewing deck, arms crossed, her golden eyes fixed on the swirling nebula in the distance. The battle was over. For now. The Typhor had retreated, and the Zarethi had finally seen the truth. They would no longer ignore the threat, no longer dismiss the humans as weak. And yet she felt uneasy. For the first time in her life, she had fought alongside humans, not as an enemy, not as a captive, but as an ally. It was strange, unsettling even. The lines that had once defined her world, us and them, honor and dishonor, were starting to blur. Footsteps echoed behind her. She didn't turn. She already knew who it was. Elias Kane stopped beside her, hands in his pockets, gazing out at the same stars. For a while, he said nothing. Then, in his usual calm tone, he asked, "Can't sleep?" Veil Zura exhaled. "Sleep is for those at peace. I am not one of them." Elias smirked. "Yeah, I know the feeling." Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was familiar. She had grown used to his presence, to his strange way of seeing the world. She had always believed humans were weak because they valued things like kindness and mercy. Yet, standing beside him now, she wondered if she had been wrong. "You didn't have to come with me," Elias said suddenly, turning to look at her. "Back to the Zarethi. You could have left, gone your own way." She scoffed. "And do what? Hide? Run?" She turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze. "That is not my way." "No," Elias admitted. "It's not." Another silence. Then, softer this time, he asked, "Why did you?" She hesitated. She didn't have an answer, not one she wanted to say out loud. She had told herself it was duty, that it was about survival, that she had no choice but to fight against the Typhor. And yet, deep down, she knew that wasn't the full truth. She had followed him. Not just because he was right, not just because he was a warrior she could respect, but because somewhere along the way, he had stopped feeling like an enemy. "I don't know," she admitted finally. Elias didn't press. He simply nodded, accepting her answer. They stood there for a long time, watching the stars. Then, after a while, Elias chuckled. Veil Zura frowned. "What is funny?" "You," he said, smirking. "A few weeks ago, you were ready to kill me. Now you're here, standing beside me, talking like we're friends." She scoffed. "We are not friends." "Sure," Elias said, his grin widening. "Whatever you say." She rolled her eyes, but there was no real anger behind it. The truth was, she didn't know what they were. Allies? Comrades? Something else entirely. All she knew was that Elias Kane was different from anyone she had ever met. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure if that terrified her, or if she liked it. The silence before war was always the same. Thick, heavy, suffocating. Veil Zura stood on the bridge of the warship, staring at the vast emptiness of space ahead. Beyond the void, past the shimmering stars, lay the battlefield. The Typhor were coming. This time, there would be no retreat, no temporary victory. It would be war, the kind that reshaped civilizations, the kind that decided the fate of entire species. Behind her, the War Council gathered, humans and Zarethi, side by side, a sight she never thought she would see. A month ago, she would have killed any human who dared to stand beside her. Now she was fighting for their survival as much as her own. Elias Kane stood beside her, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The human commander was many things. Reckless, stubborn, irritatingly confident, but he was also a warrior. She trusted him, even if she refused to say it aloud. The holomap flickered to life, displaying a swarm of red markers moving through space. Sci-Fi warships, thousands of them. A metal tide sweeping across the galaxy, erasing everything in its path. Well, Elias muttered, that's a lot of bad guys. Veil Zura exhaled sharply. You humans always make jokes before death. Elias smirked. It's how we cope. The Zerathi commanders were tense. They were warriors, bred for battle. But even they had never faced an enemy like this. The Typhor were not like humans, not like the Zerathi. They had no fear, no hesitation, no limits. They didn't bleed. They didn't break. They only destroyed. A Zerathi general turned to Veil Zura. We cannot win this. Even together, our fleets are outnumbered. Veil Zura clenched her fists. Then we make them bleed. We take as many of them with us as we can. She's right, Elias said. If we fall back, they'll keep coming. We have to hit them first. Hard. A human officer shook his head. We don't have the firepower for that. We don't need firepower, Elias said. We need strategy. Veil Zura narrowed her eyes. You have a plan. Elias grinned. Always. The Kyphor warships cut through space like silent predators. Massive hulking constructs of metal and death, their surfaces shimmering with eerie blue light. They had no formations, no structure, only efficiency. A mechanical swarm, moving as one. Veil Zura stood on the bridge, heart pounding. This was it. The moment everything would be decided. Elias' voice echoed through the warship. All units, hold formation. Wait for my signal. The humans and Zerathi had positioned their forces in an unusual pattern, scattered, uneven, almost chaotic. To any normal enemy, it would look like a mistake. But the Typhor weren't normal. They didn't think like warriors. They thought like machines, and machines had weaknesses. Come on, Elias muttered, eyes locked on the enemy fleet. Take the bait. The Typhor did. Their warships surged forward, seeking the weakest points in the scattered formation. They split apart, dividing their forces to strike multiple targets at once. And that was their mistake. Now, Elias barked. The human and Zerathi warships moved at once, closing the gaps, surrounding the divided Sci-Fi fleets. Ambush. The void erupted with fire. Explosions tore through space as the first wave of Sci-Fi warships fell. Human missiles, Zerathi plasma cannons, electromagnetic disruptors. Every weapon fired at once, striking at the heart of the mechanical horde. The Typhor, caught off guard, faltered. Veil Zura grinned. Not so unstoppable now, are they? Elias laughed. Told you. Strategy. But it wasn't over. The Sci-Fi adapted. The second wave advanced, learning from the ambush. Their movements sharper, faster. They didn't retreat. They never did. A sudden impact shook the ship. Alarm sirens blared. Shields failing, a human officer shouted. They're targeting our engines. Veil Zura gritted her teeth. Then we fight harder. She grabbed her blade and turned to leave. Elias frowned. Where the hell are you going? To war, she said simply. He cursed under his breath but followed. The corridors of the warship became a battlefield. Sci-Fi drones had breached the hull, pouring in like insects. They moved with terrifying precision, their metal limbs slicing through soldiers, their red eyes glowing with cold calculation. Veil Zura moved like a storm. Her blade sliced through steel and circuitry, sparks flying with every strike. She had spent her life fighting flesh and blood enemies. But these were something else. Elias fought beside her, his rifle blazing. He was fast, precise, his movements honed by years of battle. For the first time, they weren't fighting against each other. They were fighting as one. More drones poured in, a metallic nightmare, endless and relentless. We can't hold this position. Elias shouted. Veilzura growled in frustration. Then we take the fight to them. She slammed her fist against the emergency hatch, forcing it open. Beyond it, the ship's exterior stretched into space, gravity locks keeping them grounded. Elias stared at her. You're insane. She smirked. You humans aren't the only ones who take risks. She leaped into the void, her boots magnetizing to the ship's surface. The battle raged around her, warships colliding, debris floating in the darkness. She sprinted forward, dodging enemy fire, slicing through drones with brutal efficiency. Elias followed, cursing the entire way. They fought their way to the Sci-Fi boarding craft, cutting down the last of the invaders. The moment the final drone fell, the battlefield changed. The human and Zarethi fleets, inspired by the brutal resistance, pushed forward. The Sci-Fi, for the first time, hesitated. Elias grinned. We're winning. Veilzura wasn't so sure. She looked beyond the battlefield, at the stars. Something felt wrong. And then she saw it. A new Sci-Fi ship emerged from the darkness. Bigger, deadlier. Unlike anything they had faced before, its surface pulsed with unnatural energy, and as it moved, space itself seemed to warp around it. Veilzura's breath caught in her throat. Elias whispered, "Oh, hell." The war wasn't over. It was just beginning.